See, she found the camera there.
Red-tailed hawk, huh? What he said it was. Yeah. We're just waiting to start the walk, right? The second group out.
Yes. Yep. Did you sign up?
Alright, we're heading out.
We'll see a lot more of that as we go through the park.
Alright, no more blacktop now. Heading down the lower gorge.
This is why we need a stick.
Wow. Well attended, huh? Ran through this area. We don't know exactly where it was in here, but you'll be able to see remnants of it as we get further along the trail here. It was in operation from 1843 to about 1900. They would keep hogs in this area, and they would feed the hogs on the refuse from the mill. So this was a lot. As we get farther down, we'll see where there's a flat area. A lot of it was open farm that John Bryan owned. The bend in the river here, we call that Cutler's Hole. And it was allegedly there was a farmer that in a drunken condition tried to drive a team of horses across ice right here at the bend and fell in and drowned. So that's known as Cutler's Hole there.
There's our rosebush right here. The green.
Yeah, man. Over your head. Plus it's cold.
He's ready to.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay on the rock.
They might be slipping. They have marks on it.
Yeah, it's probably.
So, as I said earlier while we were coming down, a lot of the structures in the park were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. This was one of those structures built in the 30s and 40s. If you come over here, you can see on the bridge there's these metal plates, and you can see that there's holes in the foundation here. They had built this so that there was plates on the riverbed, and you can still kind of see them when it's clear. Well, they would raise that, and it would act as a dam, and they made this a swimming hole for people. Yeah, it needs a little work.
Yeah, we're not going that way.
Can't go up there.
We're gonna go this way.
Two of my brothers became doctors and moved to Cincinnati. So I followed them and I created a company called Physician Supply Company. We provided everything a doctor would need at the time, including the materials they need for cleaning. One of my employees created a soap that actually floats in the water. I don't know if you've ever seen it or anything like that, but there's a huge manufacturing company in Cincinnati that loved that soap, so they bought the entire rights to my entire company. And I think they're still manufacturing that particular brand of soap. I'm Not legally allowed to tell you the name of the company, but I think you could probably deduce. When I was used the money that I had, I traveled the world, and I found just all the beautiful things that the world has to offer. One of the most beautiful things I found in the Cincinnati Art Museum, and it was a painting entitled "The Blue Hole," and it's a beautiful painting by a man named Robert Duncanson. I was so enthused by it, I had to see where this painting was painted. As you progress up the trail, you'll find the place where it was actually painted, called the Blue Hole, and I came up here to see it for myself. I was so mystified by this beautiful valley, I bought the entire property. So I moved up here, I took a stagecoach up this very trail, and when I came to the horizon and saw the sunset, I said, this is where I'm going to build my house. Build a manor house up on the hill, 2 or 3 cottages right on the edge of the cliffs, and the largest barn in the world. I built a 5-story barn there that was no one had one even close to it. Well, people always have to one up you. So the Tsar of Russia built a bigger barn. I couldn't let that happen. So I built an addition on my barn to make it bigger than his. And once again, it was the biggest barn in the world. I was really involved in experimental methods. I liked inventing. I liked trying something different. So I was toying with a new crop called alfalfa. Unfortunately, alfalfa didn't grow in the land here. It needs more nitrogen. So we went down into the canyon and pulled out limestone blocks, crushed them, and spread the limestone on the fields. They produced bumper crops of alfalfa, and I think that continued for a long time to be a huge crop. Unfortunately, I'm a better inventor than I am a salesman, so I put all the alfalfa in the barn, and it's probably still up there today. I don't know. But I didn't do too good of a job on the selling part. When I bought this place, you could look over the valley and see vistas as far as the eye could see. Unfortunately, this invasive species called honeysuckle has really taken over the understory. So we're continually trying to battle that and eradicate the honeysuckle from here so you could once again see across the valleys and see a broad spread. There was a lady working for me in Physicians Supply Company who I later took to be my wife. Now, I thought we had a wonderful marriage. She's up the road a little bit, so she might tell you some different stories about how we got along. But for me, it was fine. As I was progressing in my years and I was feeling my own lifetime limitations, I wanted to preserve this park as a preserve for people to enjoy forever. My view was that I would have one of every type of tree in Ohio in the park itself. Unfortunately, at the time, the lumber companies were clear-cutting vast swaths of Ohio. What I did was have some of my guys take some of the old-growth wood and pound spikes into them. So if the lumber company ever tried to cut them, they would destroy their equipment. As a result, some of the trees here are 200 or 300 years old, and they were never clear cut because they wouldn't want to risk their equipment. As I was in my declining years, I wanted to preserve the land, so in my will, I willed the entire estate to the state of Ohio to be forever preserved as a park. The only stipulation I had, I'm a very spiritual man, but I don't like organized religions. I don't like organized churches. So in my will, I put in the stipulation that the entire land could go to the state of Ohio as long as there's never an organized religious service on a recurring basis here. They didn't like that. The governor of Ohio totally rejected the entire gift. The new governor totally rejected the gift. The third governor totally rejected the gift. Finally, there was such an upswelling from the populace that they overruled the governor and finally accepted my gift. And forever after that, this will be a park for all people to view. Any questions? Any insights, thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for your gift.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hope you enjoy it. How's that barn doing up there? Have you seen it lately?
As well.
Trees growing out.
You'll see that pretty frequently down here. This has been nicknamed Bandit Rock. It was kind of a legend that was invented by a former park ranger here. Say that bandits would climb up on the top of the rock and jump down on the stagecoaches as they were coming through, but it's probably not likely because this area of the stagecoach trail really would have only served the mills. So.
And the rock. Yeah, it is.
Look all the holes in it.
Yeah.
The things living in there, probably.
Yeah, there was some back there on the other side of the river. Really? Earlier, but that fall.
Often it tends to stay. There was another mill. I don't know exactly where the foundation was. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't, but you can kind of tell there's a berm down in here. It's probably a remnant of one of them. That was a phallus mill. It was primarily a grist mill to grind grain. In 1885, I think, was its inception. It was later converted into a keg factory when it was bought by, I believe it was J.W. King. And on Sundays, because it was empty, there was a pastor from the Clifton United Presbyterian Church would hold Sunday school there. And it was at that time the largest church gathering in Greene County. And they said that often young couples that would attend the Sunday school there he would end up marrying them. Said that they liked the vistas. It was kind of romantic, I guess. And then across the river was Butterfield Distillery, and they distilled whiskey from grain, and it was called Two Springs whiskey. They speculate the name came from a branch in the river.
Hard to imagine that much going on
I
down
know.
in here.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of work to build.
Sure does. Well, this area was, the industrial, had huge industrial power within the region for some time because of the water draw. Later, there was supposed to be a set of train
Most people knew
tracks.
how to do it. So it wasn't like a big next bring truck.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
There was going to be
Oh, they didn't do that?
no train that came through.
You just walking on
When they finally started using coal and steam power, and it ended up getting bypassed and going through Yellow Springs. And when that happened, most of the mills, they couldn't afford to operate them anymore because the cost was too great to transport. We're a mill in Warren County, and it was known as King's Mill. Well, that's the site of Kings Island.
Look at the one on top. Look at the water on top. It comes from two streams. It starts over there and it starts over there.
Some of them would be problematic.
Oh, look. I was on the I'll go under.
I'd rather be a rat.
Things we've heard.
You've run into my husband.
Could be.
Good morning. I assume it still is morning. I've lost track of time down here. I'm Frederica Bryan, and I understand you have met my husband. Believe half of what he says. The rest is probably very true. We've been married now about 3 years, and well, I haven't spoken to him in about a week and a half. So you've spoken to him more recently than I have. Is he doing well on this winter day?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I don't wish to be a widow yet. I met him when I was quite young. I was 12, and I worked in his factory in Cincinnati. You know about his business of making soap. That's how he made his fortune, was with his soap. So I was working in the factory, and he saw promise in me, and he sent me to school, which was unusual. That usually working girls, the factory girls, don't get to go to school. But he sent me to music school. And I learned to sing, and I enjoy singing. And after the trial where he had a breach of contract, maybe, he was sued for breach of contract. The woman who sued him, who was either his stenographer or housekeeper, I have lost track of what that woman said her job was, said that he had promised to marry her. And when I was visiting one day, she attacked me. And he hit her with a horsewhip to keep her away from me, and she sued him for damages, even though he took her to the hospital. So that seemed to be the beginning of our relationship, because at that point after the trial, he offered me marriage, and after he researched marriage in Ohio, he decided we should get married in Missouri. So my mother and I boarded the train and we went to Missouri.
How old was you when you got married?
I was 20. But he still called me his little girl. And I can't help it, I'm short. I guess I will always be his little girl. And so we married in Missouri and then came back, and shortly after the honeymoon on the farm in the park, that was when the honeymoon was over. And there have been periods of time when I have enjoyed the quiet of one of the cottages at the farm. So there goes days that I do not see him. And the cook will bring me food, and I have books to read. There are advantages to being married to a rich man. He can afford books and he can afford reading glasses, so I'm well kept in that respect. And he can afford to replace the dishes after I throw them at him. I need to order more dishes.
Making up's the best part, wasn't it?
I wouldn't know. Usually there's a social event and I need to come back for, and I will do that. He did not bring up politics, I hope. He'd still be talking if he did. He's finally decided that Mexico is not taking over the United States, and we no longer need to have a border protection down there to keep the Mexicans from coming in. But now he thinks that England is going to take over the United States, and so we should side with Germany in the conflict over there. And he's not making friends with that. Most of us are, well, most people are. I'm German ancestry, but a lot of people are English ancestry, and they like to stick with their own. So he spends a lot of time in Cincinnati working on the newspaper down there to educate on the benefits of Germany. And I don't see him then either, and then I stay in the manor house. So,
Did you have any children?
we have no children. And I would assume that we will not have any children. It would complicate things if we did. He has no interest in an heir at all. And he wants to make a park for the people, which is what you're visiting right now, his Riverside Park. And then he wants to advance agriculture, which is why he has that enormous barn. You did see the barn. You didn't tell him you didn't see the barn, I hope. Because he would take you to show you the barn. It has running water. It has apartments for the staff. It has lots of good stalls for the animals. It can hold 23 wagons. It's not a small barn. It may be the biggest in the world. If he hears of a bigger one, he will be building an addition to make sure it stays the biggest barn in the world. So in the barn, there's lots of cattle and sheep and other livestock and horses. There's also alfalfa. Does anybody need any alfalfa? We have, the entire loft is full of alfalfa, and we need to get it out before next season begins. So if you know anybody needing alfalfa, just come by, say you want some alfalfa, and it's usually there for the taking. You just have to bring your own wagon. We do not deliver. So, so you didn't happen to see Mr. Wiley?
Nope.
You didn't see. You can't miss him. He looks a little bit like St. Nicholas. He has a long beard. He usually lives in a little hut down here. It's a nice hut. My husband helped build it. But he's not there right now, and I brought him a pie. If you come in the summer months, he'll have soda out on a rock to sell. He keeps it cold in the spring. So if you do get thirsty when you're down here on a warm day, you just find Mr. Wiley. They call him a hermit, but he just simply disagrees with his family on occasion and spends weeks and months down here in his own quiet little solitude. So, well, if you see Mr. Wiley, tell him I have a pie for him. If he stops by the cottage, I'll be happy to give it to him. If you know anybody in town from Yellow Springs? Anybody from Yellow Springs? Oh, I was hoping one of you might be having noodles for dinner. I haven't had any for a while. I do love the noodles. So I invite myself to dinner on occasion, but it's quite good to visit the locals. So, any questions? Well, then I'll be on my way. Enjoy your work.
All right, going in the preserve now.
So we're now officially in the state preserve. We left the park and came into the preserve. That's the boundary bridge. It's kind of the demarcation point. Is everybody familiar with the difference between the preserve and park? So we're kind of, I work for the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. We're a sister agency to the park. Both of us are about conservation. With the preserves, we focus a little bit more on that aspect versus recreation. So the state preserve system is in place to protect sensitive flora and fauna, and we also have geographic features we protect. In this instance, obviously, the forest. Yeah, sort of have to slow it down.
Yeah, you gotta look down. Then look around, look back down.
doesn't feel like Western at all. Oh, really? That John Bryan was telling us about, and painted in 1851, I believe, by Richard Duncanson, who was a very important black painter from Cincinnati. The blue hole, it gets its name, especially when we get up on the rim, you'll be able to see it a little bit better, but often when there hasn't been a lot of runoff, it has a brilliant blue color because of the depth and algae. So that's how it got its name. There's a legend that there was a Shawnee maiden that was in love with another young guy, and he only had eyes for another girl, so they say she threw herself off that rock into the blue hole and waited for him to come save her, but he didn't, so she drowned. And they say if you come down here on the right night of the year, you can hear her screaming.
Wow.
They have a thing where the guy turned into a mountain and the woman turned into a lake.
Wow!
Take a boat down there?
Yeah.
Looks like down Virginia.
You get all soaked.
Been on it several times.
Look.
Nixon Hager paper mill was in operation until about sometime in the 1880s. And they would contract with farmers to dump waste from wheat off the edge here. And they would bring it down to these large vats where they would boil it down and mash it up. And then it would go across steam rollers and they would make paperboard with it. A lot of the locals did not like it very well because it created quite a bit of pollution from the chemicals. There were a lot of fish kills downstream, so they ended up closing up shop. This we have nicknamed the Amphitheater Falls because if you look at the base of it, it kind of looks like it forms an amphitheater. But you can see here when we were talking earlier about the different layers of rock, you can see the dolomites up top and how it changes layers as you come down. Cowan, get over here. Really interesting. This is one of the larger slope blocks that I was talking about. We call this one Steamboat Rock. When the river floods, it actually kind of gets a bow wave up here in the front. But they just call it that because it sort of looks like a boat. And they speculate that this large of a slope block was able to stay intact because it might have kind of hinged off the cliff above, and maybe there was enough water in the area it was bringing gravel and silt through, and it sort of cushioned it down into the gorge. Because most of these slope blocks that you see throughout here, they're not nearly this big, you know, they're fragmented.
Slipped on the mud there.
Hemlock Forest in Ohio. It's about a quarter of an acre. Than the United States. Anyone? Now you have. We call this the Tecumseh tree. There was another large white oak that was died and taken down for safety reasons that actually grew on a more favorable site than this, and when it was taken down they counted the rings. It would have been around when Tecumseh was a kid. So we call this the Tecumseh tree. It's likely older than the one that you'll see a section of up here in the Bears Den.
Right, so it is greater.
What's that, the rat man?
Yes, my name is Silas Moore, and I've been hired by the village in here about a half a mile this way to catch rats. Apparently they have an epidemic of rats right now. They're just overrun with them, and so they hired me to catch them for a penny a rat. And I'm going in this afternoon and start my hunt. And of course, if I go into their house, they wouldn't want me to poison them, because if I poisoned the rats and then they ran behind the woodwork, about 2 days later you're going to have a smell that you don't want to smell. So I would use live animal traps when I go in town. But out here, if I go to a farm and they have a tremendous number of rats and they're all around the corn crib, then what I would do is use hemlock and poison it. As a matter of fact, I just found out that while this is a good poison for rats, I was having some real blue periods lately. I went to see a doctor and he says this is good for depression. But don't take too much, or you won't have depression anymore, won't have anything anymore. But, so if you walking down the trail this way, yeah, all right. And so when you come back, I think you're welcome to come in here. And the only thing I would say is that just be careful which chocolate chip cookies you eat. There may be, if there's any teeth marks, leave those alone. And if you see anything that looks like a raisin on the table, it's probably not a raisin.
Cedar Garden Overlook. All right.
Not much, sir, not much. Well, folks, we're just fortunate that old Mad Anthony whopped the Indians good at that battle up on the Miami of the Lake back in '95. Otherwise, you'd be walking around here like that, none of you'd have your scalp more than 10 minutes. Back then, this was all Indian country north of the Ohio River. We were just moving into Kentucky. They didn't use it much, mostly for hunting, but they didn't like us being there. They'd come down and raid every now and then. Back in '77, none of us knew much what was up here, this parts. Maybe just a few of our better Indian fighters like Daniel Boone and Simon Kenton. Of course, we knew him as Simon Butler back then, but that's another story. Well, back then, of course, I was about as young as this young'un over here is whippersnapper. Thought I knew it all, thought I could just handle myself right well. I was out one day and got myself in a bit of trouble. I didn't have my muzzle loader like this. It was sitting over against a tree. I was doing something, can't remember what it was I was doing. And I looked up and all of a sudden, there was 5 half-naked savages all around me, painted up for war. And I knew I was in a big bunch of trouble. I knew if I went for my gun, that'd be it. They'd be carrying my scalp back up north. So I just put my hands up, they tied my hands behind my back, and they prodded me north, and off we went. What a trip that was. Walking, running, miles and miles. I thought we'd never stop. We come to the Ohio River, went right across it. Fortunately, the water was low, only came up a little above my knees, which is a good thing, because I'm not much of a swimmer, and I thought I'd have a lot more trouble since my hands were tied behind my back. We made it across, kept going. Eventually, they brought me to their Indian village of Chilagata. People up there settling there now that this ground's open. We call it Old Town. But back then, it was one of the biggest Shawnee villages around. Brought me in there, and as soon as we came up over that hill, and I looked down a quarter of a mile to the hill where the big lodge stood, I knew I was in big trouble. Both sides of that trail were lined with men and women and children. They all had sticks, tomahawks, and brambles, and anything they could find, and I knew what was coming because I'd heard old Kenton talk about having to run the gauntlet. Well, I took one of old Kenton's tricks. I didn't wait for the fella that was leading me behind there to tell me to go. I just lit out, and I was a good 100 feet down before those Indians realized I was coming. Then they let me have it, and by the time I hit the lodge, which is where you were supposed to be safe, I was about half dead. Well, it took them about 3 days to nurse me back to health, and all that time I was thinking, okay, hopefully one of these families has somebody that they've lost and they'll want to adopt me to take their place. No, they didn't do that. I was thinking, I hope what they don't do is have a good time with me as the pig on the spit, except that the pig would already be dead. Well, fortunately, they didn't do that neither. What they did do was almost as bad. They made a dad-burned slave out of me. All they had was, get this, get that. I knew I wouldn't be able to last long that way. There were some other folks there that had been captured from the Kentucky area, and some of them seemed to like being Indians, but not me. I was going to get out of there as fast as I could. Well, I knew I had to plan careful like, because if I tried to escape and got caught again, I would have no choice. They would just have a party. And I didn't want to be the pig on the spit. So I planned careful. First of all, I pretended like I really enjoyed being a slave. Now that was like putting socks on a rooster, but I worked hard at it. Got them to kind of let down their guard a little. They never let me out of the village, but at least they didn't watch me quite so much. I had to go into one of the wiggy-waws once. I can't remember what for, but when I happened to be in there, I noticed the butt of a rifle sticking out from under a blanket. So I, careful like, lifted up the blanket. Sure enough, there was a muzzleloader there. It wasn't in real good shape, but I could tell it would work. And there was some powder and balls too, so I just covered it all back up and just kept that up here and thinking that would be handy to know sometime. And it was. Quite a week later, all the Braves went somewhere. I don't know if they were going out on the warpath or they were going hunting or what, but they were all gone. I thought this was my chance. It's now or never. So I snuck into that wiggy-wah and I grabbed up that muzzle loader and the powder and balls and I lit out. Now I knew as soon as them engines came back, they found me gone. They'd head due south trying to find me because they figured the first thing I'd do would be to go south, get across the river and get right back to Kentucky as fast as I could. So I figured I'd outsmart them. I headed north instead, followed the north bank of the river here, up and around, and I figured if I got a good enough head start, they'd just let me go. Well, I forgot two things. First, I forgot that them engines were really, really good trackers. When they came back and found that I was gone, they circled the village and found my track, and they were on it in a minute. The second thing I forgot was I was here running like a fox with the tail of fire, but they had horses. Pretty soon I hear coming behind me, ka-thump, 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 and I thought, ooh, I'm in trouble now. Ran faster, then I could hear ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump ahead. They knew where I was. They were trying to surround me and push me into the gorge. Well, I just jumped into some bushes thinking, oh, hi. That didn't work neither. One of the engines saw the bushes move, he jumped off his horse and he stuck his head in. Well, I had that old muzzle loader primed and ready, and when he stuck his head in, bam! Cornelius 1, Indians 0. Well, you know, when you're your age on the frontier, the first thing you learn to do is when you shoot your muzzle loader, you load it again right away because you never know if you're going to come around a tree and there's going to be a bear or a mountain lion or an Indian. So that's what I did. I loaded again. Good thing I did because just then another engine stuck his head in. Bang! Cornelius 2, Indian 0. Started loading that muzzle loader again, got about halfway done. A third Indian stuck his head in, saw that there was no way I could get that muzzle loader loaded in time, smiled and said, "You steal Indian gun, you burn." That didn't sound like much fun to me, so I gave the Indian what he wanted. The rifle right in the gut, and I turned and I ran down that hill there, got a good head start, and I jumped. Now, I may not be a good swimmer, but I'm a powerful good jumper. But I saw as I was heading over the water, dear Lord help me, I ain't gonna make it. I was gonna fall short. Fortunately, I landed in some trees and was able to grab the branches and pull myself up. I hit the top and I let out like a scared rabbit, expecting any moment to hear the sound of a gun behind me and feel a bullet in the back of my neck. But that didn't happen. I just kept running, kept running, kept running. Got to the Ohio River, splashed across the Ohio River, and 3 days later, I was back home telling everybody what had happened. A couple of years later, some of those people that had been captured made it back home. They told me that when those Indians came back to the village, they said that I had big medicine, and none of them wanted to jump across the gorge and come after me, so that's why they let me go. So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. First thing I did when I got back, got my hair cut so that I don't have to worry about losing my scalp. And I learned, you remember this, young'uns, always keep your rifle with you. Never set it down against a tree. You never know when you might need it. So, Cornelius Darnell at your service. Hope you enjoyed that story. I'm kind of known around these parts. But here you are listening to an old man prattle on. You've got miles to go and things to do, so I won't keep you no longer. So have a good day, gents and ladies. Watch your scalps. There's still engines about.
Founded Lexington, Kentucky, later Cincinnati. He then moved up to the Dayton area. He had his Rubicon farm. He had a mill here. It was a woolen cotton mill several stories high. From this point you would have walked on to like the second or third floor. If you look over the edge, again, like we saw down in the gorge, you can see where the rock has been carved out for support timbers. It was a woolen cotton mill. It provided clothes for soldiers in the War of 1812. It walked down sometime, I think it was 1870, and began falling some years later. Robert Patterson was a pretty interesting guy. He was also a colonel in the Kentucky militia at one point. And his grandson founded HCR.
Is that who it was? Alright, we've had our bean soup here at the Nature Center Reserve building. We're halfway, we're getting ready to head back here and take the last half back to our cars.
Stop for a second.
You're it. Wow. Well, welcome. This fine February day in 1864. I was up visiting family. I'm actually on leave right now. Member of the 74th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. We formed back in 1861 and 62 and down in Xenia. There were nearly 700 of us in the 7 companies that formed. And then they decided they were going to ship us up to Camp Chase to finish our training. I don't know if it's up there by a town called Columbus. And we went en route. 3 more companies joined us. Our regiment numbered 798 or so of us. So we're a pretty good sized regiment. trained for a couple months, and then they decided they'd ship us south. So we went down to a little town called Murfreesboro, down in Tennessee below Nashville. We were there winter of '62, just after Christmas, when we clashed with the Reb Army for the first time. Hard battle. It's cold, wet. There's an awful lot of them. Our regiment held the line in the front, fought for an hour, shoulder to shoulder, firing muskets as fast as we could load them, and in about an hour they asked us to pull back. Orders came, let the artillery fire for a while. Over the next 8 days, we battled back and forth with those rebel army, and finally the armies pulled apart. We tried to recoup. Many of us had lost our knapsacks, didn't have a blanket, didn't have a poncho. We ended up sleeping on the ground around the fire, and those that did have blankets found out they burned holes in them as the sparks jumped from the campfire. So we went on guard duty then for a few months after that, brought us into the summer. In '63, they had us reform, and we're going to go farther south. We're going to go down to a place called Chattanooga. We formed up down there, decided we would push into Reb territory into Georgia. We've gone a few miles into Georgia around Chickamauga Creek. Worst battle. We'd already lost a lot of our men in the previous year to disease. Some companies lost half their men to disease. It wasn't battle wounds, it was disease. And when we got to Chickamauga, Rebs put up a terrible fight. We were doing all right until a big hole opened up in the line. 11,000 Rebs poured through them and drove our line back. General Thomas held the line, allowed us to escape, go back to Chattanooga for a while, but we were pinned in. It's kind of ironic you folks are actually staying in the way we felt in Chattanooga, except the Rebs held the high ground. We were down there on that low ground in a little town called Chattanooga with the river between us and them. And they were up on a mountain called Lookout Mountain, looking right down on us. So we were regrouped after that September battle of Chickamauga, tried to re-outfit, and they decided up the line that we were going to reform and hit them on the mountain. We were going to fight above the clouds November 24th. They sent our unit forward, and we were skirmishers. If you don't know what a skirmisher is, skirmisher, 4-man units sent out. Remember, we're carrying single-shot muskets, and 2 guys shoot, reload, and then the other 2 guys can shoot. And we're way out in front of the line sometimes. Well, we tried to drive them off the mountain. The next day we were over at Missionary Ridge on the east side of the city. We're going to drive them off the ridge. Our orders were to stand at the bottom of the ridge and fight from there and stand our ground. The Union boys had enough of that. They pushed on, pushed Bragg right off of Missionary Ridge and drove them back south. At that point, our 3-year enlistment was up. We didn't sign up for 90 days. We signed up for 3 years. So a little over 300 of us who were still effectively able to fight signed re-enlistment papers. And they said, well, you've earned it. So they shipped us home, so we're home on veterans furlough for 30 days, which works out pretty good for us because we got this fine February day. The train brought us up. A little over 300 of us, all that's left. The rest are gone or relocated or dead. And the fine folks of Xenia treated us to a real nice reception. The train station marched us into town. The women's seminary said, we'll feed you an oyster dinner tomorrow, and they fed us well. We ended up realizing that same day General Rosecrans, our commanding general, was going to come through, so we went back to the train station and cheered him on his way to Columbus. So on our 30 days, I decided I better walk up this way and see some of my family. We got a farm down Lone Go Station. But we felt it was our duty not to stay at home, but to sign back up and fight for this great union. Ohio was proud to put it in. We're the 74th Regiment. That's 1,000 men per regiment.
And I hear tell we've well over 100 regiments have left Ohio to fight in this great war. We're not sure if we're going to win, but we're going to try awful hard to push them out. We're going back south in April, see where we go from there. We understand that we're going to try to push them out of Georgia after that. So we're going to enjoy our 30 days at home and go off from there. And we're looking for recruits. Our ranks have awful thinned out. If any of you boys are over 18 or you play the drum, I can guarantee you $13 a month as a private and $14 a month if you know how to play the drum. Never could understand that, why they paid them more to play a drum than me shoot a musket. But it worked out that way. Now, if any of you are officer material and get appointed, you do have to buy your own sword and bring your own uniform. The way it is. But I'm dressed in my fatigue outfit, and somebody come past here and said, "What's the difference between your summer and winter uniform?" Well, if I'm lucky, I got a great coat. Otherwise, this is my summer uniform too. So, I wish you well if you have questions, especially if you want to sign them recruitment papers. And you look like you might be interested in doing it. We can guarantee your payment. Yeah, well.
Yeah, still heading on our way back, upper rim walk, walking around the upper rim.
Unless they had cables hooked to them or something to keep you from getting so close.
No, that's,
Rappel.
yep.
And them rocks is awful sharp too, aren't they?
Pretty good drop down there.
Yeah.
Yep.
You don't want to look? Okay.
Nah. See more though than you could that the leaves was on. Some people way down there. Oh well, that was a lower level we walked earlier. We're on our way out. You used to come down here mushroom hunting. Going out here at the picnic area. What does it say here? Wingo. Yeah. We're going to exit that. Our walk will be over. Well, we ain't far now. Down the Blacktop Road a little bit. Ah, yeah. All right. All right, we about made it. Car's just ahead.
Thanks for coming. I hope you guys had a good time and learned something. Thank you very much. No problem.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
Absolutely. Anytime.
It wasn't much faster.
Yeah.
We just got here.
Daddy, can we go to the car?
End of the trip, 6 miles.